Yes. And also, in order for the better traffic, I'll switch my own video off so that it would be a bit more simpler for everyone. And you can switch your videos also off in order to save the traffic for our recording. Okay, dear friends, let's start our today's lecture. Today we're going to speak about Operation Unthinkable, and as I called it, the failed Blitzkrieg after victory, after the great victory of the Soviet Union and the Allies over Nazism in 1945. And the Operation Unthinkable is one of the most unknown on the one hand, and one of the most provocative on the other hand operations that have ever been planned in history of the mankind. So let's proceed to our material. So the idea of the Operation Unthinkable belonged to Mr. Churchill. There is a mistake that we often meet nowadays, that the Operation Unthinkable was some kind of the previous German plan of some counter-attack against Soviet troops on the final stage of the Second World War, and that the British General Staff had just cosplayed this plan, just made a copy of it, and just wanted to adapt it to the realities of the summer of 1945. It's not that point. It's not correct. The idea from the very beginning belonged to Mr. Churchill, and the British war planning staff was just working on this plan under the decision of Mr. Churchill once again. Of course, this plan was being outworked and developed in the deepest secrecy, and the paradox of the situation is, so as you can see here on this slide, that even other staffs of the Allies, I mean the staff of the General Eisenhower, and even the staffs of the French troops in Europe, so Mr. de Gaulle also knew nothing about that. They were all not informed about the preparation which was going on at that time. As you can see, the plans of the operation, they included the defeat, the military defeat, of course, the military defeat of Soviet troops on the territory of the former Nazi Reich, and even a new invasion of the Soviet Union. Well, as to the new invasion, it's a bit questionable, but as to the defeat of the Soviet troops on the territory of Eastern Germany and Poland, especially Poland, that's absolutely true. So as to the invasion of the Soviet Union, it could be implemented only in the situation if the defeat of the Soviet troops on the German and Polish territory would have been successful. But nevertheless, the plan also included the total destruction of Soviet cities on the European territory of the Soviet Union. And so if we just imagine the Soviet cities, I mean Smolensk, I mean Minsk, I mean even Kiev, I mean Odessa, I mean the Soviet cities in the Baltic states, so I mean Pskov, Novgorod, and many, many others. They have already been totally destroyed by the Great Patriotic War, by the Second World War. So they would have never survived the new destruction. It's clear. It's absolutely clear. So I mentioned the probability of using nuclear weapons here, but it's also a questionable fact because the Operation Unthinkable was being planned in June 1945. And so, as we know, until the nuclear tests in the Nevada state in the United States of America in July 1945, nobody could imagine the destructive power of the nuclear weapons. And so I strongly doubt that Mr. Churchill would have some plans about using nuclear weapons. But when I speak about high probability of using nuclear weapons, I mean if the Operation Unthinkable would have lasted longer than 1 month, as it was planned from the very beginning. So if it lasted until autumn or even until winter 1945-1946, so in this case we could speak about probability of using nuclear weapons. But it's just the question of possibility. So the interesting fact that the forces which were intended for a German-style blitzkrieg would have included both British-American or Anglo-American troops and also still not disarmed German troops, Polish troops which were located on the territory of Great Britain since 1939, and even still not disarmed Hungarian divisions, which retreated from the Budapest and joined Western Allies in April-May 1945. So, speaking about prehistory of the plan, we can say that Mr. Churchill has always told and also written in his memoirs that he was very strongly concerned for the future of Europe and had the plans to impose upon Russia the will of the United States and the British Empire, even if it meant sparking a Third World War. So it was a brazen plan, to be sure, but it was one of the most efficient decisions, as Mr. Churchill thought, to stop Soviet Union in Europe. So we can say that the Allies, seeing the incredible achievements of the Soviet Union in the final months of the war, have finally acknowledged that underestimating Stalin and his forces was foolhardy from their side. It was widely believed by Mr. Churchill that Stalin would not stop at Berlin and that after defeating Germany, he would order Soviet troops to continue westwards. The point is that from Churchill's mind, he was very concerned about the fate of Poland, and he was extremely unhappy since the Yalta conference. He was extremely unhappy with Poland falling under Soviet control. And his plans focused, as he had always said, his plans were focused on liberating, as he called it, the country in a surprise attack. So he commanded the plan to be drawn up in complete secrecy, as we have already said. And so he wanted to remove Soviet troops from Europe by military means. So, in 1945, in April 1945, he sent a telegram to Roosevelt informing the American president of his concerns. But Mr. Roosevelt wasn't interested in Churchill's fears. And also, the American president thought at that stage that the war against Japan would drag out on into 1946, and he was hoping that Stalin would declare war of the Japanese Empire and help America to defeat its main enemy in the East. So he refused to entertain Churchill's notions and told the British Prime Minister that attacking the main ally of the Western Allies, Soviet Union, was something ridiculous, and it was totally impossible from the military point of view. But as we know, in April, Mr. Roosevelt died and was succeeded by Harry Truman. So Mr. Churchill has got the second chance, because he strongly believed that Mr. Truman would take a harder line with Stalin. And it was so. British Prime Minister was very delighted that the United States Commander-in-Chief now shared a similar vision. And so he started to put his own plan into the practice of preparation. We'll see some details of this plan. But first of all, I would like to tell you that the first time I've heard about Operation Unthinkable, I was studying at school. I was 14 years old. It was, as you see here, 1998. And at that time, when I read the first article about that plan, and when I firstly met any information concerning this plan, I didn't believe it. Well, I thought it was something like we say today, like fake news, or like some kind of fake information. From the historical point of view, that was totally ridiculous, and I just remember my own feelings at that time that I shouldn't pay any attention to this information. That was 1998. But nevertheless, already in 2014, so that's not that long ago, about 11 years ago, the British journalist Thomas Meyer published his book When Lions Roar. You can see this book here on this slide. And this book includes the full list of secret documents and the full list of military plans which were being outworked and developed in since May 1945 till the end of June 1945, and all the details of that plan, so they were documentally proved and introduced. The first time I read this book, I read it in English. It was 2014. The second time I read this book, it was translated into Russian in 2021. Well, the translation was adopted for the Russian reader, but nevertheless, the information kept its sense. So, what can I tell you? I was shocked. You know, I'm a historian. I shouldn't be surprised by some kind of new information which regularly appears in my field of science. Well, it's normal. It's okay. But in this case, I couldn't find the logic of this decision. I failed to find even the logic of the preliminary planning of this operation. And I couldn't explain which processes occurred in the head of Mr. Churchill. How could he generate that thoughts? How could he just imagine, I don't know, maybe in dreams, or maybe after some taken alcohol? Well, I don't know. How could he just generate that thoughts in his head? And I still cannot find the answer on this question, but I think that's just my problems. Okay, now let's proceed to the overall plan for the operation. Mr. Churchill realized that this plan would meet some understanding in the public opinion of the British Empire, but this support couldn't be total. The popularity of Soviet Union as the main struggler against the Nazi threat was extremely high in 1945. The international authority of Soviet Union and of Comrade Stalin personally was once again extremely high at that age. And so Mr. Churchill couldn't ignore that facts. And on the one hand, he mentioned that the operation will be carried out under conditions of full support of public opinion in the British Empire and the USA. Well, it's enigma for me. I cannot explain how could he imagine the level of public support of his ideas in the USA. Well, maybe in British Empire, but in the USA, that's also a question for me. But on the other hand, he realized that this this support could be only partial, could be restricted, and as soon as the operation would come to its failure, the popularity of Mr. Churchill himself would also strive to null. That's why it was also a politically risky idea. That's one more condition which I cannot explain. Okay. He also mentioned that Britain and the United States would have the full support of the armed forces of Poland, as you see, the immigrant government in London, and also can count on the use of Germany's human reserves and the remnants of its industrial potential. That's why, once again, that's why the industrial potential of the western part of Germany was not destroyed and was not that strictly punished, you can say so, as it was really planned in 1944 and even during the Yalta Conference in 1945. In fact, the Western Allies, they just wanted to use the great industrial potential of the Western Germany or the Western German part, and so in order to use it against Soviet Union once again. A very interesting point is keeping in mind the likelihood of Russia's alliance with Japan. So this point makes me believe that if Russia in any case planned the military defeat of Western allies in Europe after the victory in Germany, the Western allies could make steps to build the alliance with Japan. So that makes me to believe, if they say so. They usually accuse our country of things which are normal for them. So in this case, I think it's normal for them. And starting the active phase of military actions, the 1st of July 1945. On this slide, in its left part, you can see the first draft of the plan of the Operation Unthinkable. That's the screenshot made from this book, When the Lions Roar. Once again, you can see it here. That's a screenshot made from this book, from the original. Okay. Oh, excuse me for the Russian in this case, but it's another screenshot. It's made from the documents of the British National Archive with the comments of our Russian newspaper Zvezda. So that's why it is in Russian here. I cannot do anything with that. So the plan called Operation Unthinkable should begin on the 1st of July 1945. The Allies, well, not the Allies, but Mr. Churchill planned that the Allies should use about 47 British and American divisions to launch a surprising attack without declaration of war against the Soviet Union. And here is one more thing. It was clear that if the plan went ahead, the Western Allies would be outnumbered in virtually all military areas. The highest amount of divisions which they could really prepare for this operation, so once again, the highest number was something about 80 infantry divisions. If they used all the British divisions, all the American divisions, all the French divisions, and even all the German Polish and Hungarian divisions, and also military forces of Denmark, in order to join this operation. So something about 80 infantry divisions. On the other side, these divisions were ought to oppose 228 Soviet divisions. As to the armored divisions, the number is about 20 divisions of Allies against 36 armored divisions of the Soviet Union. We'll speak about that a bit later, but the Allies would also be outnumbered in the air. The Soviet Union had about 13,000 aircrafts of all types, while the Allies had just under 9,000 of aircrafts, all types. Also, the Soviet army in the past 2 years of war had gone from strength to strength and was highly motivated, well trained, and extremely effective. So I'm not sure that we can say the same thing about the Allied armies. And of course, the proposed attack was a very, very risky idea. You can see just the main routes, the main planned routes of these attacks on this map. Now, you can see here one very interesting photograph. You know, dear friends, it took me about 2 hours to prepare this lecture for you, because I have enough materials, because I have earlier read this lecture in my university, and I have prepared it earlier, but today I have just changed some slides. I have made some new commentaries, and so on. But it took me about 5 hours, to research or to study this photograph. Let's look at it very attentively. So what do we see here? I think we see here some Danish city, maybe that's Copenhagen, maybe some other city, in late spring 1945. I guess it is early May or late May 1945. So the German troops in Denmark and in the Netherlands and in the western part of Germany capitulated and surrendered on the 2nd May in 1945. So these military troops capitulated. But we see here German soldiers which are armed, which are fully, totally equipped. We can see officer here with the planchet. We can see another officer here. Once again, we can see the rifle here. We can see the civilian patrol. Well, I guess it's some Danish soldier or civilian. And the most interesting thing that we can see British soldiers here. Look at them. Here, 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 and here, and also here. Their military berets are very acknowledgeable. It's very hard to mix them with anything else. That's the British Navy Corps of Mr. Montgomery. So, what does this photo tell us about? Well, as for me, I see an idyllic picture here. I see some kind of alliance here. But that's not the Western alliance. That's not the anti-Hitler alliance. That's the alliance of Great Britain and Germany. Once again, a very peaceful picture. And what are they doing? What are these people doing? Well, I don't know. Maybe they're buying something in this boutique, in this shop. We can't see a single broken window anywhere. Yeah, we can see advertising and so on. Well, can you imagine the 6th Army of Wehrmacht, which capitulated in Stalingrad on the 2nd of February 1943, and German soldiers just walking along Saratov or Samara or maybe Kuibyshev, Rostov, and so on, and buying any goods in shops and reading the advertisements. Well, I cannot imagine that. I cannot imagine German soldiers walking like tourists in Moscow in 1944. Not like the prisoners of war, but like the tourists. And here I cannot identify which soldiers are occupiers and which are the liberators. I cannot identify it from this picture. So the second thing this picture tells us about is that about 12 military divisions of the German Wehrmacht, which have surrendered in Denmark, were not disarmed, and they remained in total military form. They were well prepared. They were ready for combat use, and they were just waiting for the order. So once again, we can see the operative reserve, the military reserve for the operation Unthinkable in this very picture, and nothing else. Here you can also see some calculations, some data. So, as to the Germans, something about 100,000 people. As to the Hungarian units, 12,000 people, 3,200 men from Estonian collaborations. And as to Lithuania and Latvia, about 21,000 men. All these soldiers fought against the Red Army, against the USSR, and that means that all these people fought for the Nazis during the war. Well, that's just commenting about the personnel which was planned to be used in the operation. Here you can see the directions of main strikes. That's a screenshot made from the Russian TV program. That's TV program number 2. So we have that news program, which is called The News of the Week, in Russian Вести недели. And that was the first time when Operation Unthinkable was totally revealed on our television. It was 2014, and I looked that program with great interest, with much more greater interest than I did it in 1998. So I was already interested in history in 1998. I was already reading books. I was already preparing my first historical studies, well, on the school level, but nevertheless. But in 2014, I have already been PhD in history, and I was already planning my doctor research. That's why this topic was extremely interesting for me. So you can see here that the plan of the land campaign envisioned two main strikes in northeastern Europe. The northern one along the axis of Stettin, Schneidemühl, Bydgoszcz, that's in the north, and the southern part along the axis of Leipzig, Cottbus, and Poznan, with the final point in Breslau. It was believed that the outcome of the operation was to decide the tank battles that unfolded east of the Oder-Neisse line. But once again, the British General Staff was not that optimistic. Well, I would also say he wasn't that stupid to take this plan seriously, to take this idea seriously, first of all. And to the honor of the British General Staff, it did its best to persuade Mr. Churchill that this plan, this operation, was a political and a physical suicide. We shouldn't forget also about the work of the Soviet intelligence. Today, when the lion's share of documents are unsecreted and we can read them not only in the book When the Lions Are Roaring, but also in other scientific articles. For example, about 10 articles were published. That's only the articles which I have read in the period since 2014-2025. But of course I haven't read all of them. So we can read a lot about the work of the Soviet intelligence. And now we can be sure that Churchill had no idea that his highly classified information was flowing to the USSR. That means that Soviet intelligence worked brilliantly, and the Cambridge 5, which is used to be called the Cambridge 5, in fact, these 5 brilliant, so we can call them residents or spies, even spies. There's nothing bad in that, I think. They never worked together, and they got acquainted with each other only after they left Great Britain and moved to the Soviet Union. So here you can see the history, the very brief history, how the plan for Operation Unthinkable was given to the USSR. And as to the USSR, as a historian, I cannot tell you that I have seen any documents being declassified nowadays. I haven't seen some such documents which persuade me in the opinion that Comrade Stalin planned an immediate counteraction or maybe even counterattack against British and American troops in Europe. I can only tell you with 100% that Comrade Stalin knew about that plan. Yes. But once again, I haven't seen any documents where he planned any counteractions. Maybe they are still classified, maybe they just do not exist at all. But there was one interesting military maneuver in the Central Europe. So as we remember, the plan or the operation Unthinkable was to be started on the 1st of July 1945. But in fact, on the 30th of June 1945, Soviet troops in Central Europe have totally changed their locations, as if they were getting prepared to something. And what was that something? Maybe that was the reaction of the Soviet General Staff on this information, on the information concerning the Operation Unthinkable. Maybe it was so. So once again, I'm a historian, so I have to show you the documents which support this point of view. I do not have these documents, and in this case, that's just my opinion, and of course, you have the right to disagree with it. So, once again, I have already told you about the thoughts of Mr. Churchill about Poland and about the strengthening positions of the Soviet Army and of the Soviet Union itself in the Western and, in Eastern and Central Europe. And that's why that was the main leitmotif for this operation, for this planning. Here, once more, some calculations concerning military troops and concerning the possible consequences of the British attacking Soviet troops. As I have already said, the British military staff did its best to persuade Churchill to refuse from this operation because of its unrealistic character and totally catastrophic consequences should have prevented him from this suicide. The main character who played the crucial role in the final decision of Churchill to reject this plan was General Ismay. Well, I guess you know who Mr. Ismay is. He was the first Secretary General of NATO in 1949. But in 1945, he was the chief of the Prime Minister's personal staff. He was a brilliant staff officer He was a very experienced staff officer, and he also had his own authority in the eyes of Mr. Churchill. And so when he investigated the plan, when he read it several times, when he made all the corrections of that plan and met all the ideas of Mr. Churchill in order to make this plan better and more efficient, he finally came to the conclusion, once again, once and once again, that this plan was a suicide. And as he told and introduced all his arguments to Churchill, finally Churchill agreed with him. But he agreed with Mr. Ismay not just because he was that great lover of the Soviet troops, of the Soviet Union, and the great friend of Comrade Stalin. Not because of that, but because of the fact that he understood that the United States of America should never support that avantgardistic plan. So in fact, British had the risk to remain alone against the Soviet military supremacy. So in this case, it was absolutely irrelevant even to plan this operation. Well, not speaking about starting it. But you see here that I call it not rejection, but reformatting. What do I mean? I mean the reformatting of this plan into the NATO strategy. This plan laid the foundation of the NATO, or the first NATO strategy, adopted in 1949. And it's not that occasional that, once again, that Mr. Ismay was elected, or maybe selected, I don't know, to be the first Secretary General of the NATO alliance, just because he was very experienced, not only in staff planning, but also in the details of the Operation Unthinkable. And with some corrections, and with some maybe new points, and now, of course, with the total support of the United States, this plan really laid the foundation of the first NATO military concept, which was relevant since 1949 till 1955. And after the Federal Republic of Germany was incorporated in NATO, NATO had also changed its military doctrine, but its doctrine has always been aggressive, and it remains so until the previous time. Okay, maybe that's it, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, these are the sources and bibliography, if anyone is interested in it. It's not all of them, of course, not all of them, but the lion's share of the documents which I used when preparing this lecture, and some articles, as you see. Thank you for your attention. And now, if you have any questions, any comments, maybe any thoughts, I would be happy to answer your questions and to take part into a discussion. Thank you for your attention once again. Okay, please.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, I heard you refer to German soldiers which were still in Denmark, as the picture clearly states. Is there a date stamp, some kind of time profile of that picture to determine when it was taken?
Well, we can only guess when it was taken, but as far as I can estimate, it's something between early May 1945 and late May 1945. Something about 3 weeks between the first and the last date. I think it is so. But in any case, in any way, it is May 1945.
Okay, because I know for a fact that in certain areas of Europe, especially along the coast up in the north, the Allies were actually not in control, not in full control over these territories, and they've placed up until the Potsdam Conference basically agreed on the dissolution of the German army, that the Allies actively chose to put Germans in control over these areas to make sure that there weren't any under control of Allies in mixed groups, together with Allied soldiers, to make sure that there weren't any fascist or communist upflares within the local population at that moment.
Yes,
and
it is so.
I heard you say that you couldn't imagine or you couldn't find anything about why those Germans were there with their weapons, but that was a conscious decision of the Allies to keep them in control. And it's true that they, of course, reserved, I believe, 10 or 14 divisions for Operation Unthinkable, if that would have been green-lighted by the British government.
Yes, I cannot. No, thank you for a comment, for a brilliant comment. Thank you. I cannot understand not the situation that these soldiers are armed. I cannot understand the decision of the Allies that they let the Germans, the Nazi Wehrmacht, to be armed after the capitulation. That's the point I cannot really understand as a historian and as the patriot of my country. That's the point I cannot understand. But you are totally right. Everything you told is right. It's okay. Thank you. Thank you for your comment.
Okay, and then I had a question about what you said in the beginning of your lecture about what was the run-up to Operation Unthinkable, and why did Churchill think about such a crazy plan in the first place? Because it really seems like a crazy plan. Do you think that the aftermath of the Yalta Conference, especially what happened between the Yalta Conference, the basic surrender of the German army on the 8th of May in Berlin to the Soviets and the 7th of May to the Allies, and the Potsdam Conference?
Yes.
I think that the reasoning of Churchill, although completely crazy and in my opinion never justified to start any kind of war, but that the reasoning for Operation Unthinkable came because of the distrust that the Allies had against the Soviets based on materials that they've intercepted with their Ultra operation, Operation Ultra, combined with the agreements that were made at the Yalta Conference. And of course, the hopes of Churchill that the follow-up president of America would be more hardline than Roosevelt, that all culminated into Plan Unthinkable.
Yes,
would that be a logical reasoning, a logical way of thinking?
It's a yes. Well, I partially agree with you. In fact, the Yalta Conference was some kind of a trigger that made Mr. Churchill to be so concerned about the strategic situation in Eastern Europe. The problem was that Mr. Churchill was totally disappointed with the results of the Yalta Conference. On the contrary, Mr. Roosevelt was very pleased with the results. But Churchill always pointed on the fact that the British Empire hadn't made any effective steps to stop the spreading of the Soviet influence in Eastern Europe. And the United States of America, so they nearly stood on one side with the Soviet Union, Roosevelt and Stalin. And so Great Britain could not count on spreading its own influence in Eastern Europe as they really wished. So he was disappointed with the results of the Yalta Conference and starting to think and starting to plan that crazy operation. That was some kind of his psychological revenge. We know that Mr. Churchill was also very impulsive. He was a very impulsive person. And so making that idiotic plans, if we call things in simple words, so making such plans that reflects his psychological portray, I think. And yes, I agree with you that it was the Yalta Conference that triggered Mr. Churchill to plan this operation. Yes, if we say it in simple words, yes, we can say so. Thank you very much. Так, Dagmar, please.
Yeah, I think it jumps a bit too short if you just think about psychological motivation. If you look at the development of the Second World War between Germany and Britain before, you see that Britain only withstood the sea blockade due to American support.
Mm-hmm.
They were not able to keep up their trade routes without American Navy accompanying their ships. So I think it has to do with the fact that actually it was clear the British Empire had lost and had lost profoundly. There were costs to pay for this American protection. They were indebted due to that. And so there was, I think, a need for Churchill to assert British imperialism in one way or the other, and that was the easiest possibility. And it has never been. There was a large section of the British ruling class that had been sympathizing with the Nazis all the time, and so it was for the people or for the working class, it was a no-go. I mean, Churchill lost the first elections after the war to Labour, but it was something, acceptable for the upper class, and that's one thing. The other thing is what they decided to keep these German troops in Schleswig-Holstein later on had consequences for the German development, because it's one of the spots where a lot of Nazi functionaries survived and were well kept, so that they could re-enter into the state machinery after 1951. The Brits definitely didn't do us a favor with that.
Yes, as to the Germans, you're absolutely right. And I would also add that when the Federal Republic of Germany joined NATO in 1955, do you know the number of German divisions which joined the NATO forces? that was the number of 12 German divisions. So that's the point. That 12 divisions, or maybe at least the staffs of that 12 divisions, which remained undisarmed until 1955. So as to the decision of the upper class, or for the upper class in Great Britain, well, in fact, it's very difficult for me to support or to disagree in this case. You know why? On the one hand, it's very logical, everything you have said. It's very logical that the working class would have never adopted that idea. And as to the upper class, it's okay. The ideas of imperialism have always been above all in Great Britain. Yes. But on the other hand, the problem is that if we look at this plan, it was a suicide. And the only thing which the British upper class would have never done, is committing a suicide. They want to live, and to live as long as possible, longer than all of us. It was such a risky plan that it was uncomfortable for everyone, both for the working class and I think that for the upper class also, because this plan had no chances for success, absolutely no chances. So in this case, well, once again, it's a bit difficult for me both to agree or to disagree with you. Well, I think that we'll stay in our neutral positions. I have heard your position. It's very interesting. Thank you very much. But, well, it's once again the matter of discussion. Thank you. Okay, please. 2 more questions, please. Oh, you're marked here as Mr. Guest. Please.
Yes, it's my name is Alexander. I can't change the name on the
Okay.
little thingy over here. Actually, I was familiar with the Operation Unthinkable because, as I mentioned previously in one of your lectures, I've studied history in university, and we did the professor at the Second World War class he did mention this this operation, and one of the I think one of the reasons why they did it, they planned it, is one of the main reasons is because Churchill very much hated communism, and he didn't like the Bolsheviks, and it was dated even before actually during the Russian Revolution. His hatred started way back then, so it just grew and grew, and he couldn't accept the fact that the Soviet Union beat one of their proxies. Actually, what I think is mostly the Germans, just like today's in Ukraine, it's a proxy. They were a proxy because the American and the British elites, they were supporting both sides of the war's effort. They supported the Allied efforts, and they also supported the German war efforts. So it's to them it was normal, and they wanted to get to regain their prestige, their empire. And he had, like Dagmar mentioned before, it was they lost their empire, and they had this phantom pains. You know, when people lose an arm or a leg, they have this phantom pains, and that's what they were going through. And I think this is his main reason for this. And let's not forget that Churchill was the one that had this speech in Fulton, Missouri, where he mentioned the Iron Curtain. He's the one that created that Iron Curtain, basically, when you think about it, with his hatred of the Soviet Union.
Oh, well,
And he embarked also the American elites who were very naive in all of these things. They hardly knew anything about politics in general. They were isolated in their little island, basically. And there was also General Patton, who said that we fought the wrong enemy. They hated the Soviet Union. And I think that fueled also Churchill's crazy idea.
yes, thank you very much for your comment. Well, in this case, it's very easy for me to agree with you, because it's absolutely clear that Mr. Churchill hated communism, and I would also say he hated Russia in any kind of this country, whether it could be the Russian Empire or Soviet Union.
Yeah,
yes,
true.
as the British imperialist, he hated Russia as the enemy in the great game, as they call it, as
Yes.
the opponent of the great game. So, and yes, in this case, it's very easy for me to agree with this point of view. Of course, yes, he really hated communism, and he really felt the um, phantom aches to phantom pain, because he realized, I agree once again, that the British Empire, in fact, had lost that war and went out the Second World War being totally dependent on the United States of America. I agree with this. The only thing I cannot agree is that this plan could be some kind of a proxy war. You mean the proxy war is when you make somebody to struggle instead of you for your interests. That's the proxy war. Yes, he could make Germans to fight for the British interests, that 12 divisions. He could make some Hungarians, some Poles. Well, it's not the problem. But the main country who would have been defeated, totally defeated, if that plan would be realized, that was Great Britain, of course. So it's not the classical example of proxy war. It's the example of aggression, I think. It could be a proxy war if that were the United States of America who could possibly have these plans and make the British, to struggle against Soviet Union, while the United States remained neutral. Well, that could be some kind of proxy war in Europe. But in the case of Great Britain, that wasn't a proxy war. That was just the planning of aggression with all the consequences for this isle. That's great that they understood that in time. Thank you. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Yes, we have one more question. Robin, please.
Hello. Thank you for the lecture. I've enjoyed it. I always enjoy these. What's his name? Churchill was a nut. It's like he's a nut, like the Netanyahu. We call him Bibi here. They're both nut cases. So that's the history repeating itself. But one thing, whatever situation I look at, I'm not a history buff, but I do pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a spiritual person. I'm a great believer. I believe in God. But I always look at spiritual history or biblical history. And as far as, and I've always said this before in my other comments, when I look at Russian history, from what little bit I know, and I was just talking to my son, I've never heard in history where Russian has been defeated. They may have come close. What was the name of the war that you were just telling me about? The Bolsheviks. There was a war, I think it's called, where I mean, Russia was. They were almost annihilated, but they weren't defeated, but they came back. They were able to come back. Am I right about that?
Yes, of course you're right.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. And so in history, nobody's ever been able to beat Russia. And so that in itself has been a problem for historically. And so Russia is always, like the young lady just said about the Iron Curtain. That's all I've ever heard, the Iron Curtain, the Iron Curtain. So, you know, Russia has been the big bad monster who everybody should hate simply because nobody has been able to defeat it. And to my knowledge, I've never seen Russia be the country to initiate a war. It was always some other nation who was pointing the finger at Russia or trying to fight a war like the proxy war we're doing right now with the Ukraine. We're trying to fight another war via Ukraine, but you're always trying to poke the bear. The bear doesn't poke anybody else. Everybody else pokes the bear. And so whenever you see that, to me, spiritually, it says there's a reason why everybody is going against Russia. There's a reason why Russia is the bad guy, but there's also a reason why God has not allowed Russia to be overcome. So that's what I look at. And when I come to these, because my son's listening with me, when we come to this lecture and we hear this Operation Unthinkable and what they were trying to do and yada, 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 it helps me to understand more and more that there's a spiritual undercurrent that's going on that perhaps needs to be investigated as well. But I really did enjoy the lecture, and thank you so much for having them, and please continue.
So,
Bye-bye.
Michelle, thank you very much for your commentary. Well, I think your commentary is even comparable with my lecture. It's one of the best commentaries I have already heard. Thank you very much for your opinion about my country. Thank you very much for your kind words and for your estimation of the lecture. Well, it's a great honor for me to work with with all of you. Thank you very much, my dear friends. Well, we have got one more question. So, unfortunately, I don't have enough time at that moment because I have to do some work for my university. I have also one lecture in my Rudan University, dear friends, in 22:20 Moscow time. Okay, but nevertheless, thank you once again, my dear friends, and I hope we'll meet with you, I guess, monthly. So I'm going to prepare one lecture per month, and we'll meet with you, and we'll continue our historical educationing over here. So thank you, dear friends, once more. Thank you for your attention. Have a nice day, or maybe have a nice evening. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.